Jay Roach had quite the streak in the late 90s and early 2000s by directing the Austin Powers franchise, which started as a sleeper hit, but eventually became one of the most popular comedy series. Around the same time, he directed the 2000 hit Meet the Parents, which starred Ben Stiller and Robert De Niro. There had been quite a few Ben Stiller comedies previously, but this was new territory for De Niro, so it was probably shocking to audiences just how well casted he was in the role. And the film would become one of the most popular films of that decade, and to me, one of the funniest movies ever made. I grew up with Meet the Parents, but I'm probably more familiar with Meet the Fockers, which was a staple of my family movie nights. It may seem a bit weird that my parents let me watch something like Meet the Fockers, but it was PG-13, and any of the risque material that I didn't understand, it's not like I brought it back to the schoolyard with me. My family was pretty loose with what we could watch. Raunchy comedy is fine, but blood, gore, or South Park, that's not cool. As the years went on, I came to appreciate Meet the Parents as the better film, which is probably obvious to everyone now. To me, it's still one of the defining comedies of the 21st century. I'm not sure how well remembered it is today, but for the 20th anniversary, I think it's about time I give this one some praise. Plus, it was a Patreon request, so I'm monetarily obligated to give it some love. The premise is nothing too original. It's about a boyfriend meeting his girlfriend's parents the weekend of her sister's wedding. This leads to shenanigans that have been done before previously and ripped off in later films. In fact, this was a remake of a 1992 low-budget feature also titled Meet the Parents. It didn't really make much money or get attention, but Hollywood got a hold of it and decided to remake the whole thing in glamorous, big-budget style, with A-listers and a couple other actors you've probably never heard of. I think movies about weddings and unacquainted characters can lead to all sorts of humor, but often this kind of thing fails when it gets blown out of proportion or things fall out of place tonally. For instance, another similar feature from recent years was Why Him? It had nearly the same premise, but things got so ridiculous, and the main boyfriend was portrayed as a complete idiot. A lot of the humor fell flat because there was nothing to relate to. In the case of Meet the Parents, it feels incredibly relatable to the awkward conversations and interactions you have when you're introduced to new people. There's misunderstandings, long pauses, jokes that fall flat, and overall the chemistry doesn't always work. And this is all good things. This is what makes it funny. Robert De Niro has a few surprises, but he is the perfect version of an overly protective, conservative dad. Stiller probably has the harder role to pull off, because he needs to be likable while also incompetent at times. The reason he makes it work is because he may do a few dumb things and lie, but by the time we get to those parts, we're already on his side, because so much of what happens is not his fault, and he's just doing his absolute best to make a good impression and get along with the father. Everything he does feels reasonable in the moment because we understand why he ends up in a situation and how it's sometimes just a series of unfortunate events. I could possibly see this not working today due to the dry humor. It's not an in-your-face, bust-your-gut kind of comedy. It's nearly the complete opposite of something like Austin Powers. The first act moves pretty slowly, and most of the jokes rely on the awkward tension of the proceedings. There's stuff mentioned that's better left unsaid, like Greg's distaste for cats, or the gift of the Jerusalem tulip, which is meant to impress a florist like Jack, but as things go along we realize he may not be what he says he is. The most talked about moment was the lie detector scene. It became so iconic, it led to a TV show and a hilarious reunion parody on SNL. This is what makes the character so great. Jack is so persuasive and hard to argue with, and Greg is too much of a pushover and an airhead, so it makes sense that they would start this interrogation. Of course, Jack is making a few jokes, but then he starts asking some serious questions about Greg's character, because he doesn't trust the man who's with his daughter. I appreciate that Jack doesn't treat Greg like total crap. There's definitely a smidge of dislike from the beginning, but he gives Greg a few chances. He includes him in the wedding almost by force, and he doesn't assume that his daughter is keeping to overly traditional roles. But a lot of the failings are because of a few misunderstandings, and by the end, it's Greg's own desire to impress that becomes his downfall. By the time the sister and her fiance's family shows up, things really start getting funny. There's a freak volleyball incident, the septic sewage is overflowing, there's a fire, plus Pam's ex-fiance shows up as the sister's fiance's best man. If that didn't make things complicated enough, this ex-fiance is like the perfect man, with an extravagant home, carpentry skills, tons of money, and strangely enough, a bunch of photos of Pam that are just sitting in his house, which she's apparently fine with, making things even more peculiar. Greg loses the cat and finds a different one to impersonate it, the brother frames him for smoking pot, and there's that epic car race home with all the red lights, which feels so familiar and frustrating. By the end, it really feels like Greg is on a different planet from the rest, which leads to a very funny scene at the airport where Ben Stiller really goes over the top. At this moment, you have to almost give him credit for keeping so much in for the duration of the family get-together, because he can lose it when needed. It doesn't have a saturated look, which adds to the uncomfortable realism. There's a song at the opening performed by Randy Newman, which sets us up for a pleasant, happy romance, but of course, it was only there to trick us. Things end up working out in the end, and Jack accepts his daughter's choice for a relationship, even if he still has his grumblings. He decides it's about what makes Pam happiest in the end, rather than trying to scope out the perfect man for the rest of her life. I appreciate that they don't oversimplify the characters at the conclusion, and rewatching this, I think it's aged very well. It's still very funny, it has a lot of memorable moments, and I plan to return to this numerous times in the future. It's still one of my favorite comedies, and if you haven't seen it yet, this would be the perfect opportunity to go meet the parents. I can't believe I ended a review like a pun. Special thanks to Lucas for this Patreon request. Thanks for watching the video, and special shout out to Anthony, Anna, Kirsten, Lucas, Ryan, and Robert for the support on Patreon. By joining my Patreon, you can get exclusive videos and blogs, and for only $7, you can request your own movie review. I hope you stick around, cinephile, and have a happy, productive day.